Good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Colette Watson, and I'm part of the Media 2070 team at Free Press. And tonight, I'm here to welcome you to Reclaiming Our Story, a live virtual conversation between Black movement journalists and activists on the power of narrative, specifically Black narrative power. If you'd like to follow along with us tonight or add to the conversation, I want to invite you to leave comments on Facebook or on YouTube, wherever you may be watching. And also be sure to include the hashtag Black Narratives Matter, especially on Twitter. Before we begin tonight, it's important for me to let you know that this event is presented by Media 2070, the Media Reparations Project, in collaboration with our close partners at Media Justice. In December, Media 2070 published a 100-page research essay with examples of anti-Black harm from throughout the history of the media system. Now we're gathering media makers, activists, and story keepers to help dream up media reparations through the Media 2070 Consortium, which launched also in October. Before we begin, I want to honor our Indigenous siblings whose land the organizers and attendees of this event are on right now here in the US. And I also want to take a moment to honor the labor of Black journalists who have come before us, like Ida B. Wells, L. Alexander Wilson, Monica Roberts, and so many others. Thank you. So tonight, as I mentioned, we're discussing Reclaiming Our Story as part of our Black History Month series here at Media 2070. Reclaiming Our Story is a conversation uniting some of the most exciting voices at the intersection of media, race, and power. And one of those voices is our moderator for tonight, Anoa Changa. First of all, I know Anoa, and Anoa is amazing, but I have to let you know a little bit more about my friend. So she's an organizer by nature and a retired attorney by trade with a deep history of working within the realms of advocacy and justice. Her passion lies in building collaborative political spaces that fundamentally change the way communities and grassroots organizations engage with the social and political systems around us. Anoa is a movement journalist deeply influenced by grassroots-led electoral organizing efforts, and she is the host of the podcast, The Way with Anoa, which I'm sure so many of you enjoy just as I do. So without too much more delay, I'd like to kick it to our wonderful moderator for this evening, Anoa Changa, who's gonna tell us a little bit more about maybe yourself, Anoa, and also get us introduced to our panelists. How are you? Hi, Anoa.
Hi, I sound so amazing when you read it out loud. Oh my gosh, I need to aspire to be as awesome as that person on paper is in real life. But thank you, Colette, so much. And thank you to the entire fam for making this event possible for these conversations that we're having in Black Narrative Month. Just even the focus and conversation about constructing Black-centered narratives, right? And how Black narratives matter. I love that hashtag because we are really defining and creating for ourselves how we're talking about our experiences, our reality, and our way forward, right? And so when we're thinking about narratives, it's so much more than just simply messaging and how we're phrasing things. It is really the totality of the framework that we are putting together as we're discussing issues, experiences, and other occurrences that are happening, not just in the world around us, but even how we are understanding and engaging. And so thank you so much for bringing me on board to have this conversation with these amazing panelists. I don't even really need to be here. We just need to let them just talk and their brilliance just shine. But we can start bringing folks along in. We are joined by Bridget, Diamond, Tia, DaLyah. Like, I mean, this is an amazing lineup. And so I will, because of the way everyone's lined up on my screen, I'm going to start with Bridget. And so we are going to just do quick introductions so we can get into this conversation. Name, pronouns, organization. I didn't give my pronouns. My name is Anoa Changa, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I love when people do get creative and use like beautiful or queen, but I'm trying not to be a biter, so I won't say those. But I'll start with Bridget because Bridget is next up on my screen.
Thank you. So happy to be here. My name is Bridget Todd. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm the communications director for UltraViolet, a gender justice organization, and the producer and host of iHeartRadio's podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet. Happy to be here.
So excited to see you, Diamond. And I think, Diamond, I'm going to see you again next week, too.
Yes, we are. We've been hanging out a bunch. My name is Diamond Hardiman, and my pronouns are she and her. I am a part of the Media 2070 team, and I'm also the News Voices Colorado manager for Free Press.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Tia, next up.
Hey everyone, I'm Tia Oso. I use she and her pronouns. I am the Director of Communications with the Action Center on Race and the Economy.
Excellent so much. And DaLyah.
All right. Hi, I'm DaLyah Jones. I work at Texas Observer, and my pronouns are she, her. And I am the Director of Community Engagement here at Texas Observer.
And yes, DaLyah is at the Texas Observer. Yes, that Texas, like the Texas that has been having that situation and doing amazing work. And I mean, this is just a part of the credit and tribute that Black journalists, Black navigators through comms experiences, that we still manage to be able to help tell the stories and get the information out there. And so much of this conversation is centered around like, how are we shaping Black narratives? And so my first question, and because of, I think, your experience just this past week, DaLyah, I'll start with you. What does Black narrative power mean to you? What does that feel and look like in your wildest dreams?
My wildest, that's a good question. I think that Black narrative power is being able to unapologetically occupy a space or a platform, or having the mic and being able to convey that story without feeling like you have to be kind of closed in, and kind of being free with that narrative and honest and vulnerable. So I guess kind of that's what the imaginary, dream of Black narrative power is to me.
Awesome. Tia, next up. What does Black narrative power mean to you? What does it look like in the wildest dream?
For me, Black narrative power means owning our stories and also being able to control and advance narratives that we're centered in and that we have the central role in, not narratives that have us in reaction or in response to other people, or in service to other people's narratives.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Diamond, next up.
Those are great answers. I think a lot of what Black narrative power to me means is being able to be seen in your fullness. So being able to see yourself reflected and see your community reflected. Colette has probably heard this story a billion times, but I always talk about like Toni Morrison in narrative. And in one of her books, she talks about Baby Suggs, and Baby Suggs has a different name, like her bill of sale name and she still goes by Baby Shugs. And someone asked her why she does that. And she was talking about how her partner was sold off to someone else. And if they came looking for her, they wouldn't be able to find her if she went by some other name. So I think that that's like what Black narrative power is to me and what I want it to look like in the future. It's like an ability to be able to see ourselves and see ourselves reflected in our community in a way that's really about seeing each other and connecting us to one another.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Bridget, Black narrative power, what does it mean to you and what would it look like, or what does it look like in your wildest dreams?
Yeah, I echo all of the other panelists. I completely agree. I think for me, it really does come down to that fullness that we just heard about, really having the power to show the full spectrum of Blackness, of Black identity, and all of the multifaceted, melanated beauty that it comes with it. And I also think it looks like there truly being room for all of us and all of our stories. It looks like not having to have this fake mindset that there can only be one of us or a few of us at any given time, but there's room for all of us, all of our stories, and money and support and amplification for those stories. And so those stories are being told and centered, and then also money is being thrown at them to continue to tell them. So it's both.
I really appreciate the way in which you all approach this, and definitely we need to have the money and the funding to get our narratives and stories out there. But at the same time, something, Tia, you just said about not simply responding to, right? But, I think we often find ourselves in a defensive position just because of the nature of the way in which we have engaged and existed in this country. But we have so many powerful examples of how people branch out on their own and drive their own narratives, drive our own narratives and tell the accounts. When I think about, a turn of the 20th century Black newspapers and the coverage of, multiple different things. When we start off talking about Ida B. Wells, the Red Record, when we talk about, challenging narratives or centering Black narratives, having a Black woman from the South tell the stories and document lynchings, one of the most violent terrors that have been inflicted on the soil. Like, that is such a powerful example. And it's okay. We all don't have to have like a red record in our life to have our narratives still have meaning and be powerful. So just thinking about, that focal point about how we are setting out and doing our own narratives or leading and creating our own narratives instead of responding, what are some examples of narratives that either in your own work or that you've seen that are powerful examples of how people are branching out and establishing their own narratives versus just simply responding or correcting it? I'll actually open this up to anyone who would like to start.
Well, I actually would love to start. I don't want to put you on the spot as our moderator, Anoa, but even the work that you do with your podcast, you were talking before the panel started about how so much of your work is getting people to challenging people's understanding of the narrative that we've been fed. And so looking at the election, getting away from horse race coverage or poll coverage and really looking at, who are the people who are on the ground, who are the Black and brown folks on the ground who are impacted by policy, shaping policy, organizing. Nobody was really telling that story, right? Like, we have been so accustomed to the way that you think about election reporting is, these old white guys are doing stuff. Let's rank what they're doing and compare them and contrast them. And so I think having that space to say, I'm going to flip the script. I get to say what election reporting looks like. I'm going to create election reporting that reflects the story that I want to tell, the story that I feel. So I would definitely cite your work as an example of that.
Well, thank you. Oh my gosh. Just to respond real quickly, that is just even being in the moment that we're in still right now, we're within the first 100 days of a new administration. We started out this year with a violent white supremacist attack on the state capitol, on the US Capitol. And we saw other attempts to attack capitals around the country, even during last year. And so there have been really harmful narratives that have upheld the status quo, which is whiteness and white supremacy, that have brought us to this moment we're in. So it's kind of wild that we still have to kind of push people to cover these issues differently. But that's their comfort, right? They're so busy arguing about why they should get to say the N-word in certain instances versus actually digging in and dealing with the harmful narratives that continue to be perpetuated. So Bridget, thank you so much for lifting that up. back over to folks. I saw some head nodding. I mean, DaLyah, with your work.
Yeah. Well, I kind of think about this from like a standpoint of somebody who grew up in a small rural town, right? I didn't get interested in history until I used to go to the preacher lady of my hometown and go sit on her floor and actually listen to her tell me about history, listen to her tell me about Black people who grew up in Deep East Texas, right? And so I kind of think about the narrative power and kind of that cohesion that Black women kind of help spread and the narratives that we help kind of push forward as well. And so I also think of that moment whenever I think about a Nicole Hannah-Jones, right, in the 1619 Project. That's a very mainstream, a very well-known example of a Black reporter taking the narrative back and actually saying like, this is the truth, and let me report it out to you, but also let me give you a whole curriculum to help you learn it a little bit better. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I mean, we've just seen so much, even in the coverage of the backlash to the 1619 Project and the ridiculous legislation or legislative attempts across the country to do what Trump's 1776 Commission failed to do, just really having those conversations and digging into why we even see this emboldened focus on distorting history in this way. Like, it acts like there's a both sides when there really isn't. So I really appreciate that. Tia or Diamond, do you have any thoughts on example of narratives that were really just powerful in driving new ways of approaching concepts instead of just simply responding to?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter and hashtag Black Lives Matter, which a lot of people don't know now, but started off as a narrative project and started off as a creative communication strategy to talk about state violence that was happening to Black people and talk about it in a different way. And so being a part of that genesis around, we're going to use hashtags, we're going to use people telling the stories of their loved ones. The news headline is always like police involved shooting or, Black, suspect, things like that. So using people's names, using people's faces, having their families share, telling stories about their lives and who they were and where they come from. And then really talking about the fact that what's happening to them is not the story that the media, wants to spit out to us about, the officer felt threatened or this, that, and the third happened, but really talk about the fact that this person was a human being. They had a family. They did not deserve to have their life taken from them in an extrajudicial way. And also the extrajudicial killings and state violence that's happening to Black people is systemic. These are not isolated incidences, and giving the rise to and space to a national conversation and discourse that advanced the narrative Black Lives Matter and also advanced it unapologetically and began to also shift the focus away from, one singular kind of Black male movement leader figure to we have a leaderful movement, and begin to shift the conversation away from pathologizing Black people as we're the reasons why these things happen to us in our communities, but really begin to put the spotlight on and the emphasis on systemic racism and structural racism as the problem. And a lot of the backlash that we see happening narratively around race in this country is a part of that national conversation as well. And I think that Black Lives Matter really began to call the question in a way that hadn't been done in a long time.
I need to unmute myself, obviously, but thank you so much, Tia, for pointing that out. I was just going to say, even noting just how we're thinking about leadership is just so critical, because people have always thought that they have to fit in a particular role or model of leadership. And we have seen, because of the way people have been leading, but also talking about the narrative about the work, that there are other models and ways that we can organize and build collectively. So I do appreciate you lifting that up. Diamond, thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of want to riff off of what Tia said around a narrative that I've really seen changing in the work that some of my colleagues and I do at Free Press around safety. So I think this has a lot to do with the movements and organizing and the work on the ground to rethink, like, not even rethink, to connect the thread of the fact that we keep each other safe and really questioning and talking about who and what keeps us safe. And a lot of times we're seeing that we know that the answer is not policing. So for journalism to really think about using police as sources or centering their narratives and stories, and instead of doing crime beats or mugshot galleries, thinking about what do people actually need to know to keep themselves safe. So whether that's critical information or whether that's how to navigate the criminal legal system or things like that, that's a narrative shift that I've seen that's changed. That's really powerful, and I'm glad to see more of it going on.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I completely agree. And I think even when you look at the current, situation we're all in with COVID and the storm, even as our leaders try to go on vacation to pretend like, things aren't that bad, even as our leaders are not able to help us get any kind of resources when it comes to COVID, look at who actually has been providing. It's us. It's mutual aid. It's organizers. It's folks on the ground. And so I just want to uplift that we are the ones that keep us safe. We are the ones that protect each other. And when the rubber hits the road, we see our leaders. They should be there, but we see they're not. And it really just underscores exactly what you just said, that we keep us safe. And I think we've seen so many great examples just in the last few months.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for the wisdom that is just being dropped, nuggets. I hope y'all are enjoying this conversation so far. We are going to take a quick video break because we have a video perspective on Black narrative power from our gracious host here at Media 2070. Oops. I'm going to kick it over to Colette, and Colette is going to show you this awesome video perspective right about now, I think.
I think Black narrative power means we have the ability to really hold tenderly and steward our stories from ideation to creation to distribution and everywhere in between.
Black narrative power is really, for me, about being able to call out false information as we see it distributed to the masses, then also bringing more attention to the actual solutions and the realities that combat those false narratives that we see in mass media.
Black narrative power is the freedom to create, ideate, and share our holistic lived experiences without needing the legitimization of white supremacy, mainstream media, and other state actors.
It's not just for February. That's not just for Kwanzaa. Our narrative power is very visible and abundant.
Black narrative power is always rooted in connection and community. And being able to harness this narrative power is essential on the road to Black liberation.
Thank y'all for that video interlude for our conversation. I mean, I really do appreciate how we are seizing this moment right now to talk about Black narratives and building Black narrative power, particularly coming out of last year, right? With the uprising. I mean, even getting people to allow the word uprising versus protest to be printed seemed like, a major step forward. And we've been pushing even further beyond that at this point. And so gonna just kind of go off script a little bit and ask y'all, just thinking about the last 9 months or so as we've been looking at coverage and narrative development, have we really had a real reckoning in the way Black narratives are being depicted primarily in, mainstream media spaces? Or do we still have work to do in getting real representation of Black narratives? So I'll open up the floor to anyone who would like to jump in.
I'll get us started. I think that we have a lot of work to do because I think that the ways that Black people's lived experiences are covered is oftentimes covered with a lot of skepticism, or a lot of, it's just from a default perspective of whiteness and white supremacy and upholding the legitimacy of the state and not really questioning or reckoning with what's happening and whether or not what's happening to Black people is right. So the fact that the 1619 Project not just, was provocative and caused a lot of conversation, but a lot of the pushback on it, not just on the 1619 Project, but on critical race theory in general, on the teaching of these concepts and discussing whether or not racism, enslavement, profiteering from the brutality and the violence, or when you think about the demand to defund the police and how that has been narratively engaged with as illegitimate. We just have a very, very long way to go when it comes to really, as you put it, reckoning with the ways that, the Black experience is happening and unfolding in this country and really globally.
Thank you, Tia. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I can go next. I think I completely agree with Tia. I also think, you framed your question in terms of thinking about mainstream media. For me, myself personally, I want receipts. I want every mainstream media outlet that posted their little Black square back in the summertime. I want to know what have you done since then? Like, what material impact have you made on the way that Black stories are told within your organization? I want to know, what does your board look like? Who's getting paid what? And I do think that we have a lot of work to do, but I think that some of the stuff that you're seeing happening just in this last few weeks where, organizations are trying to use their storytelling to highlight racism and structural barriers at other outlets without looking at their own outlet first. And so I really want receipts. All these people who were like, yes, we're your allies, this and that, back in the summer, I want to know, what have you done since then? It's been a long time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Show us the receipts. Other thoughts?
I wanted to hop in on what Bridget was saying because I was thinking about the LA Times and the Kansas City Star. They both published apologies for the roles that they've played in upholding white supremacy. But the LA Times specifically has been in a lot of hot water because they posted this apology, but we're not seeing materially like how that is affecting the specific people in their area and the specific people in their newsroom. So I think that I would agree with Tia that we have a long way to go. And someone from our Media 2070 team was on a Clubhouse panel last week, and we were talking about how we don't want stories about Black people. We don't want white folks telling better stories about Black people. We want Black people to be able to have the power and the space and the room to tell their own stories. So I think we have some work to do.
Yeah, and to add to that too, I think it's encouraging to see this moment where we're seeing more Black journalists start like independent outlets, more Black journalists get hired to these like highbrow positions in places that we haven't historically seen them. But I don't think that that's going to, of course, like be the end all be all. Just to kind of repeat what was just said about like us being able to tell our own stories, but also like, again, like we need the receipts, and not only the receipts, but also what initiatives are you putting in place to have that pipeline continue of Black journalists and to allow them to have that type of lateral movement within these institutions as well. So it's encouraging, but it could always be better.
Absolutely agree. Bridget, did you want to jump in again?
Yeah, I plus everything that everyone has said. I used to work at MSNBC, in a past life. And I remember what it felt like to be in a newsroom, this place where I thought would be my dream job, that I had fought and clawed to get there. And the first time I had to walk back a tweet that I said, oh, a police officer shot such and such, and I had to walk it back and say, oh, no, you know, police involved shooting. Or there was a very specific incident where it was a frat and they were on video singing a song about how there would never be an N-word in their frat. And I described that as a racist chant. Seems to check out. And they were like, no, we got to walk that back to, you know, racially tinged or whatever little euphemism they were using for racist at that time. And I think you're exactly right that I think that only now, we're only scratching the surface of the way that we have the mainstream white media outlets have made it seem like people of color and Black folks, we cannot be unbiased, right? Even if you're a journalist, even if you're trained as a journalist, if you're writing about your own issues, your own lived experience, you cannot be counted on to be an unbiased expert or authority on your own lived experience. And I think we have been in that paradigm for so long, and only now are we only able to really sort of have the conversation. But we were not having it even a year ago, I don't think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I also wanted to add that what I'm hoping to see out of this reckoning too is the ways in which we do share stories or tell stories from our own communities too. I think about like how important Black folklore was here in Texas and how important it still is, and the ways in which like folks share information and they learn within their own communities, and how can we take that folklore strategy and kind of put that within our storytelling, right? Or within our news reporting to engage communities that have historically not been prioritized when it came to coverage in the first place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Something else that just really struck me, just thinking about listening to you all talking, just reminded me of a panel I moderated a couple of weeks back for a sci-fi con. I'm a big sci-fi nerd, folks. But it was a panel about Black joy. And I'm on this panel with 5, 6 amazing Black authors writing for all age groups. And one of the things that folks were talking about was just even the way Black authors in these other spaces are treated or dealt with in comparison to their white counterparts. And so one of the authors on the panel, she writes for young folks, preteens, etc. Her book series, even though it was about some Black kids and some dragons, I'm really excited. I think I'm gonna have to go buy it. But it was just thinking about how they were like, okay, so it's a 5-book series and they only did 2 of the books. And they were like, we're not going to do any more. So she started self-publishing. But what she said was, because of what happened with the uprising, because of people calling things out last summer, and, you know, to Bridget's point, you know, folks with their little squares and, oh, yes, we stand with this, it forced them to reevaluate and re-examine how they approached her in her series. So even in the conversations that we're having, we're looking at things like, in terms of literature and these other spaces of having narratives, right? We're talking about reclaiming our stories and narratives in more of this journalistic sense, but like having Black narratives about, you know, happy Black children and magic and fantasy is often, you know, such a really integral part to our ability to vision and build imagination, right? That's not just little white kids in Narnia, even though I love the Chronicles of Narnia growing up, but like having these other alternatives so that our, you know, young folks can see themselves in these other worlds and scenarios, which also expands their understanding of what's possible for their future. So, I mean, I think there's just so many ways in which, when we're talking about reclaiming stories and building out space for telling our narratives, when we're looking at the full range of spaces, whether it's in, you know, more traditional media, journalistic spaces, doing communications work with organizations, or, you know, innovating in the fiction world, there's just so much rich opportunity to really like drive it home. And just dispelling this notion that somehow stories about Black people, whether they're real accounts, positive or otherwise, or fictitious, don't resonate with other folks as well, right? Like somehow if we talk about Black folks, then it won't appeal to other people. And that's a narrative in itself that needs to be deconstructed and pushed out the way. So we have a couple of questions, but I have some questions still. But we're starting to get some couple of questions. And we have a question just talking about the reality of folks grappling with white editors, or if you're in an organization, I would submit just dealing with white, you know, other comm staff or white leadership, and being able to greenlight or get permission to, you know, change these stories or to promote, you know, new narratives that don't actually hold folks accountable internally. Jamila says they parade powerless Black faces and voices out there, but they also make sure to neuter folks' expression, I think, internally. So just thinking about like it's just a general, I think, conversational prompt more so out there about in the ways in which we have, whether it's editors or leadership within, I think, progressive organizing spaces will allow for particular stories to be out there, but then they themselves don't do the internal self-work or accountability.
Yeah, I actually wanted to hear Bridget talk some more about this, because I think that what it's indicative of is anti-Blackness, like a really just a deep-seated way that Black people are regarded. And so it's like, okay, I'm not going to trust you with your own story. You're talking about your lived experience and you coming from your perspective and covering the story is biased, where a white person talking about, you know, how they grew up or things and tropes that are familiar to them is, you know, they're putting their flavor on it or they're giving it, you know, character and personality. And when we make a ruckus in the streets coming from like a movement perspective, you see how culture shifts and you see how that type of pressure has people to question things, but they do not question deeply their own bias and perspectives. So then you're left to kind of battle. And I think when we were preparing for this conversation, we talked about like integrating into a burning building. We're battling for, you know, Black stories to be told honestly and authentically, to reckon with the truth, right? And then you get these responses and these reactions where people want to hire more Black people or point out that they, you know, have Black people on their teams, where that person is battling these things behind the scenes. Like the commenter mentioned, that at the foundations and at the structures of these institutions, they do not want to reckon with their anti-Blackness.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is. I agree. It's a tough question. I'm grateful for your insights, Tia. It is. How can I put this? I think for myself, I eventually learned that thing that you just described, integrating into a burning building, that was my experience. And I think that I learned that in addition to doing my everyday job that I wasn't paid very well for, frankly, I would have to take on the work of running into that burning building. And that looked like crying at my desk. It looked like coming home and kind of unburdening the weight of having felt like not a real human, not a real person all day in a newsroom. And honestly, that work broke me. I this is not a very optimistic answer, but this is like the answer I give in, you know, among us Black women here. I feel, you know, I can share this. I feel like that is kind of the trip of working under white supremacy, is that you have to take on all of this extra labor unpaid in addition to your regular job just to tell your story. And it's exhausting and it's dehumanizing and you hate it. And it has a physical toll on your sense of self. And in my case, you do it until you can no longer do it and you have to check out, right? And so I would love if anyone else has a better solution, but I think that's why you see study after study showing Black women leaving newsrooms at these record numbers, unlike any other demographic. And I think that's why. I think we do it until we can't do it any longer. And it's incredibly laborious work.
Yeah, and I kind of want to echo what Bridget said too, like this, and especially if you're only in a newsroom, you have this, you feel like you're obligated to share or to report on certain stories. And so it's like you have to balance, like, do I suffer in this newsroom, or if I don't do the storytelling, then who will? Who's going to go missing? Who's going to go under the radar? And so I think it's really sad that we have to sit there and bargain, for our own physical health and our mental health and our sanity. In order for like Black people's narratives to actually be seen or told in the first place. Like Bridget, I had my first job was at NPR, right? We know how public radio is. And so, it broke me mentally. And then I remember that I lost so much weight too, just from the stress of it all, but couldn't name it at the time, right? And so I think about the times when I walked into the door and like my stomach would churn or my stomach would tighten, or like I would purposely not sit at my desk and go sit like in an office somewhere so that I can avoid avoid my other coworkers just so that I can get my reporting done. And it's just like really unfortunate that we have to do that in the first place. And it's really unfortunate that like you're a very young reporter, a Black reporter, and you don't have anybody to go to, right? You don't have a mentor that you can talk to about these things as well. So.
Yeah.
Woo.
I
Yeah.
want to
Go ahead, Diamond. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
With what DaLyah said at the end about like it when you don't have a support system. And I think that that is one thing or one of many things that we could see coming from the reckonings that happened this summer is that folks are getting connected to one another, whether it's in newsrooms or nationally or regionally. Journalists are talking to each other and building solidarity with one another and building power. And I think when we talk about journalism as an act of keeping folks safe, I think that that's another way that we can think about how do we make interventions on harm as it is right now. And that's a lot of the questions that Media 2070 is asking with the consortium. It's like, what intervention can we make on harm right now? And I think solidarity is like one of the biggest ones.
Absolutely appreciate that. Just, I mean, my mind is like fluttering. I know we have a bunch of questions coming in, starting to come in through the chat now. But one we just had was what the intersections between disabilities and people of color. And a lot of people who have disabilities are also people of color, right? So it's always weird when we pose groups that are also, it's more that Venn diagram versus like separate groups. But anyway, the question is, what do you recommend for journalists of color to push forward? Or how do you recommend journalists of color push forward empowered narratives in covering people with disabilities versus a pitiful one? I mean, I definitely listen to and take leadership for folks who have been doing disability justice work, and I'm learning. I will say that I am learning, and I take my cue from other folks, other writers I know who are very firmly in that space, and even just learning about the ways in which we may be disabled but not realize that it counts as a disability is something that also has been just a part of my own just evolution, I think, more recently. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I think for me personally, it's the same way I tell stories about the work people are doing or experiences that people are having that centers people and lets them be the actual vocal like experts of their own experiences versus I don't think anything that I would do would look at it in a pitiful or pity way. And I think that's a very Eurocentric white supremacist framing that we tend to see on the way issues and people are covered. So, but I do think that there is a conversation in the space to have that, I would look to folks who identify as disabled journalists who are leading and doing that work in terms of how we have those conversations. But if anyone else has better insights on that question, I will turn it over to the rest of the panel. I mean, one person, I'll just also say, oh my God, my name is blank. I love to shout people out who do great work, and then my mind starts to blank on names. But Vilissa, looking at Vilissa's last name right now, but Vilissa is a Southern-based organizer and writer who is, Vilissa Thompson is an amazing writer and disability justice advocate who is definitely one of the people that I look to in terms of like how to make sure I'm approaching conversation stories. And you don't want to do this in a way like, let me just pick your brain. Like none of us like that, right? So we shouldn't do that to anyone else. Like I hate when white people do that to me. So why would I do that to somebody else? But at the same time, is there a way that you can collectively build in community with folks to learn more about how to approach things better? Or if you as a journalist have space and opportunity, can you help provide that space for somebody else to do that reporting themselves, right? So that's just something that I think of from my experience. I hope that kind of answers the question. I don't know if other folks have thoughts.
I was just going to add to like we said earlier, when we talk about anti-Blackness and folks having to do that inner work personally, I think that like that goes the same for like Black journalists too. Like we have to have these conversations internally about ableism. We have to have them about like disabilities as well, and be like open with those conversations too. I think that we live in a very ableist society and we're all afraid to kind of talk about certain subjects. And so I think it's just like actually intentionally making that space to actually have these conversations, regardless of how uncomfortable they may make you feel.
Yeah, I think also expanding on that point, looking at things through a disability justice lens, a lot of times the way that we talk about things is as though it's not, it is biased because it's coming from our perspective. And so we don't actually problematize things. So we'll say that something happened really successfully without looking at it from a lens of, you know, someone who's differently abled or not able-bodied. Sometimes we look at talking about say like the vaccine rollout, and they're like, oh, there's all of these long lines and people are really excited to have the opportunity to take the vaccine, without talking about, you know, what does access look like for people who are not able to do things like stand online, like looking at and examining even when we talk about, you know, what are the issues that are going to be really important, and we're putting together a poll. Does the poll include questions about access? Does the question, you know, do the questions in the way that we're framing them actually even include people who are having a different lived experience, let alone centering those perspectives?
Definitely appreciate that. So another question we just got is, large news corporations contribute to sensationalized news, and there's a celebrity culture that tends to get created around, you know, like news superstars. And then sometimes they're just like, you know, they're tropified, or they're like, you know, oh, look, there's the one good one that does this exceptional thing. So how do we think that, like, having that one good Black reporter, maybe there's a couple of good Black ones who get recognized by white media outlets as being the go-tos, how do we think that impacts the Black storytelling or the reimagining of the ways Black stories are told in media?
Can I say something? Sorry, I'm gonna jump in this. My little country self. Let me jump in here. I feel like there's a lot of elitism, right? And it makes people feel that they're not allowed to be in a particular space because they don't fit the mold of Blackness, or they don't fit a type of like dynamic that this particular reporter has. Like, I actually had this conversation the other day about how like reporters don't have to go to Columbia. They don't have to go to these like highbrow like journalism schools in order to be an amazing reporter and an effective reporter at that. And so I don't know, I just think about that all the time, and the ways in which, like, you know, these superstars have these platforms. What are they also doing to kind of helm up other Black reporters or like Black independent newsrooms who may not be able to get into the same doors that they're in?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that really relates to something that Tia said earlier on the panel, this idea of, you know, like articles and news pieces about like movements. They love to have a one, usually a guy, usually a male, you know, one male figure to be like, oh, this is the leader, as opposed to being like, no, this is a leaderful movement full of lots of different voices. I think it's the same thing. I think it's a trap, a particular quirk of capitalism, that we love telling the story of this one special person. And I do think we see it impacting the way that we understand and tell stories about Black identity, that it's easier for people to understand it through the lens of one person's perspective. But that erases the fact that usually, particularly in movements, there are so many people and so many voices who are behind the scenes helping to make change. And so I really want to get to a place where, even though it's very easy, even though it's a great story, we don't have one person, whether it's an activist or an organizer or one Black journalist, who is sort of representing something. We're hearing more voices, just more voices and more stories included in the narrative.
Yeah, I wanted to hop in. I was going to say the same thing about Tia mentioning how we have leaderful movements. And I would agree that it's like a special quirk and trap that really has to do with power and what it looks like to have decentralized movements and what it means to like share power. And it also brings up the question of things around colorism and ableism and what voices are getting lifted up, and how we're making sure that abundance can exist. We don't have to have like a central figure. Like I think someone said this at the beginning of the panel, what the future we want to look like is there's room for everyone to be able to share their stories, and there's an abundance. So I think that it's just a nature of like an obsession with hierarchy and not being able to share power.
Yeah, I think expand also on that with Diamond's, your point about like abundance. I think that there's a way that like choosing a celebrity or popularizing like one way of being or one mouthpiece for the culture or for the community. Number one, it's just false, and it flattens down a lot of like things that are really actually more complicated. And it also can make it makes it really tricky to try to navigate the complexity of an issue, because if you are like, I'll take the kind of the evolution of Don Lemon for an example. You know, when he first hit the streets in Ferguson, it was like, he got to get out of town. And, you know, him being allowed to have that platform at CNN and the way that those stories are being told, it was almost like, okay, he's a good Negro. He's down here. He's not being treated right. He's not, you know, the community's not listening to him. Maybe they're right about how bad things are in Ferguson, and the way that the police are treating these people is warranted. Like, it's really dangerous when we have Black cultural figures and media figures that are not able to speak to a multiplicity of ideas, and then also multiple ideas are not allowed to exist and coexist in the same place and space and time. And it makes it really dangerous to talk about Black issues, because if you're not in alignment, right, with the established norm or the established frameworks, it makes it creates like it creates false choices and false binaries, where it's like, well, that's not really Black, or is that really how Black people feel? And here you are like, I'm Black and this is how I feel, so yes, it is. You know, like, why can't we have a bigger conversation?
Yes. Tia, I thank you for bringing up the Don Lemon thing. That's such a good example. I also think it really, that false dichotomy that you just described, I think it really plays into this sort of what people call like this scarcity mindset, that there can only be one of us. I've been told that by white editors to my face, like, oh, we already have a Black woman's perspective. You couldn't possibly need two. Why would we need that? And I think, right. Exactly. I have this friend, Amber Phillips, who's a genius. You should all follow her, Amber Abundance. But she has this attitude of like, what happens if you make choices from an abundance framework, that there is enough for all of us, there's enough for all of our voices, there is enough opportunity for all of us, there's enough funding for all of us. What if you operated and made decisions from that particular framework, as opposed to a framework that says there can be one Black superstar reporter, there can be one Black perspective, there can be one Black whatever, really rethinking that there is, you know, that there really is enough for all of us.
I love it. Y'all just bringing in so many good nuggets. We got audience asking really good questions. A question, though, that I really did want to make sure that I asked are just thinking about obstacles. I mean, specifically, this is thinking about Black movement journalists, but I think we could expand it for Black journalists and movement organizers generally. But what are some of the obstacles that we're facing, and some of the ways that we're combating and overcoming those obstacles in terms of working on telling, you know, full narratives like that are complete and representative of Black lived experience?
I would say imagination. And I feel like especially white editors have a very narrow viewpoint of what Blackness is and what Black communities do and how they operate. I kind of think about like when I first started out reporting and like Harvey hit, like early, like maybe 1 or 2 years into reporting. And I remember I pitched the idea to do a story about like an organization providing lotions and moisturizers for Black people, right? And like, you know, that's not really a great example, but it's just like a small example of like what Black people may need in response to like disasters, right? I also just, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I just want to hear what the others have to say, but.
We'll definitely believe in the power of staying moisturized.
Well, I mean, that too, but it's just like, you know, like I remember my editor being like, why would you do a story about that? And I'm like, well, do you realize that people have literally like moved their lives? Like they have literally have nothing. And I'm like, when you get a job, when you go to school, right, these are things that Black people have to be aware of in order to integrate back into society, or even have the confidence to walk into a room or to, you know what I mean? So I don't know. It's just like one of those imaginations where I was like, you know nothing about Black people at all, actually.
Yeah, I think, and I saw another question in the chat about, you know, talking about Black suffering versus talking about Black excellence. And I think that example also is just an example of telling a story as it's relevant to Black people and from a Black perspective, and how important it is that we have things that are more nuanced, because, you know, relief efforts, right? When people respond into what it is that they're going to give or what they're going to contribute, you know, you see on the news, oh my gosh, there's a disaster, I need to send help. And here people are sending, you know, Pantene Pro V. And if it's mostly Black people that were hurt or needed the shampoo, I cannot use that. So there's also like a deeper thing to that around like being able to like be really real and authentic in the stories that we tell, and having the space to do that. And again, not narrowing it into a white lens or a white framework that is not useful to us.
I also think about like having to over-explain certain concepts or words when we are reporting. Like that like irritates, like especially here in Texas, right? We have this like Texas exceptionalism type of like approach, especially from like a white, very het cis white point of view, where it's like Texas this and like the Westerner, the Southerner, and there are phrases that you don't have to explain whenever you're writing for like a Texas magazine. But if I decided to say like swanging and banging, or if I decide to say, right, some other slang term like meddling, right, like some country in Black, I have to explain those words and those terms for you, right? And what I also try to like hone on to like editors is like, I'm not writing for them. I'm writing for us. Like, and if people don't understand a particular term, they can look it up, just like I would have to look it up within another article that somebody else wrote. So.
Mm-hmm. I think going on what you were saying about imagination earlier, just thinking about people need to maybe branch out and consider they're missing audiences, right? There are people out there that you're not engaging who want content that's relevant and related to them. And because you can't see the possibility of conversations beyond your own understanding, you're not engaging and building people, particularly at a time where both print and digital media is struggling to find audience, right? Diamond, did you want to say something? Hop in? I wasn't sure. I'm not calling on you. You don't want to, just want to make sure.
I was like nodding vigorously, but no, I love this conversation. And Tia and I were on a call earlier, and we were riffing off of this idea of imagination, but also like giving Black storytellers, Black journalists, Black media makers the space and like the time to be able to imagine, to be able to tell stories that matter to them, that matter to their communities. And we talked a lot about the way that journalism has been marketed as a service and how it's currently like acting as a product. So what does that mean about having to create things that will make money? And what does that mean about like stifling imagination and then stifling like the ability to dream of new things to talk about and new worlds and all of that?
Diamond, you hit me right here.
There's nothing else to say after what Diamond just added. And so it's 6:58. It's about time for me to kick it back over to Colette. But like, I just want to say thank you so much to our amazing panel. This is a conversation that we could just keep on having. It's just right, y'all. Thank you so much to folks who have been engaging with us in the comments section on social media, and really appreciate the team at Media 2070 again for hosting us, because Black narratives matter, not just this month, but like all the time. So Colette, sending it back over to you to close us out. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Oh, y'all can't get away that fast. Wait just a minute. If this were an in-person event, I would say everybody give it up for this amazing panel. This brilliance that you've shared tonight is truly, truly transformative. And I think the fact that our comments are on fire right now is a testament to that. There's a lot of people experiencing these dynamics in newsrooms, and of course, all of us being impacted in the world, in our lived experiences. And you really help some folks know that A, they're not alone. B, that there's a better and more abundant world and future out there for us. And I know it's possible and it's coming when I hear conversations like this. So thank each of you so much. All the people out there watching on Facebook and YouTube, please give it up. Feel free to clap it up in your home. It's okay. Because we have to send positive vibes. Thank you so much, all of you.
And thank you, Colette and Anoa.
Yes, thank you, Colette. Thank you, Anoa. Thanks to all all of y'all. This is really, really, really good. It's a great way to end the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I feel good.
Yeah,
So
this is, well, I was gonna say this is really energizing for sure, and it was an honor being on this panel with all of y'all. So thank you.
Yeah, this felt so close, even though it was over the internet. So I really appreciate all y'all for your warmth and your dreaming, and Colette for planning this, and Anoa for moderating.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I'm just gonna sadly let y'all go for the evening, but I just want to say again to all the people watching, please make sure to continue to support these panelists. They each have incredible platforms, from podcasts to organizational work and organizing that they are doing in the world. So please make sure you visit the caption of this video, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, to get their names and get plugged into what they have going on, particularly Anoa's podcast, The Way with Anoa, and Bridget's podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet. If you're like me, I'm a podcast addict and I highly recommend. But you can plug in with all of our panelists, and you can plug in deeper with the Media Reparations Consortium at media2070.org. That's media2070.org. My name is Colette Watson, and you're watching Reclaiming Our Story, a panel conversation that we've just finished up on the importance and power of narrative shifts on the path to Black liberation. This event tonight was presented to you by Media 2070, which is a project of Free Press, along with our close collaborators at Media Justice. So I definitely want to give a shout out to all of my colleagues at the organization Free Press and all of my friends at Media Justice. Shout out to you. This work is impossible without every single one of you. We did publish a 100-page essay detailing a history of media anti-Blackness back in October, and you can read that and again get involved at media2070.org. So what did you think of the conversation tonight? I want you to head over to Twitter, if you use that platform, and let us know and use the hashtag Black Narratives Matter. Let us know what you thought of the conversation tonight, what you would add, and let's do this again. The best way for you to stay updated on the next event is to plug in with us at media2070.org. And if you're watching on Facebook, there's actually a link in the video caption that says Join Media 2070. Go on, click that. I'm from South Carolina. Go on, click that, and you'll be able to get plugged in with us. Thank you for watching tonight. Thank you so much to our beautiful and amazing panelists. And thank you to ACT TV, Progressive Media Organization, for helping us get this stream shared out tonight. Thank you to everyone working at the intersection of race and media to shift power and realities toward abundant Black media futures. And have a good night.